Well, good morning. We are going to read Psalm chapter 4 together this morning. Answer me when I call you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. How long will you people turn my glory into shame? How long will you love delusions and seek false gods? Know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself, and the Lord hears when I call to him. Tremble and do not sin. When you are on your beds, search your hearts and be silent. Offer the sacrifices of the righteous and trust in the Lord. Many, Lord, are asking, who will bring us prosperity? Let the light of your face shine on us. Fill my heart with joy when their grain and new wine abound. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. May the Lord bless the reading of his word.
Thank you, Sue, and good morning to everybody joining us online live. Those of you joining us during the week, everybody over at the fire hall, our friends up in Churchill, everybody here at the factory, and a special greeting this morning to all the friends and guests that came for Charlie's dedication over at the warehouse. It's great having you guys with us as well. So we're launching a brand new series that we're pretty excited about. It's going to walk us through some of the Psalms. You know, we're calling it God's Playlist. Now, I was thinking about back when I was a kid, I didn't have a hot clue what a playlist was, right? I mean, I didn't know what that was. If you wanted to play different songs in sequential order, you had to get up out of your chair, you had to walk over to that big wooden cabinet, you had to open it up, and you had to flip the vinyl record, and you might listen to one song, and then you'd have to flip to another record in order to listen to the next one. That's all we knew about a playlist, right? Now, if you happen to have a little sister whose name was Siri, you could say, hey Siri, fast forward or maybe switch the 8-track, right, in the car. And they might. Hey Alexa, why don't you fast forward the 8-track? And you'd have about a 50% chance that they actually would do it, depending on how well your relationship was going with your little sister. Now, unless you lived in the 80s or 90s, then you could take your shoebox tape recorder, and if you had two of them, you could join them together, and you could actually dub one song to the other, and we created, not a playlist, but we created something called a mixtape. Yes, the mixtape. And this was sort of our idea of a playlist, right? And you could listen to the playlist. So today we're part of a playlist generation, which is so awesome. I love the new technology. It's not only cool that we can put together these playlists, but it's really, really helpful. I mean, let's say you're in a really crafty afternoon sort of feel. You're going to do some sort of crafting. You can find the perfect crafternoon playlist, right? It's a thing. Maybe you want to get some great dinner cooking music going, and you can get your kitchen swagger on, and you can go find your playlist all about kitchen swagger. If you live in a center where they have commuter trains, and you missed your train, and it was the last train of the day, did you know that there is a train station sleepover playlist to help you get through the night, because you're going to be there all night till the next train comes in the morning? If you happen to break up a romantic relationship, you can go and find the Move On and Don't Look Back playlist. There are Girl Boss playlists. There are Rainy Day playlists. There are Songs for Slackers playlists. And then if you happen to have a bunch of kids in the back seat and you're on a long road trip, there's Bored in the Back Seat playlists. I mean, these are awesome. There's a playlist for everything. And the thing about a playlist is these are specially curated songs that you choose. And these are songs that they're intended to ease an angst in your soul, to fire up a passion, to soothe a pain, or to assist you in a challenge that you're going through. Playlists are awesome. And so as a church, we're moving on to our 10th book of the Bible that we're reading together. We started about 90 days ago or so, we started this 1,000-day challenge to read through every chapter of the Bible in 1,000 days. We're doing it just bite-sized chunks, a chapter a day. I wonder, we're heading towards 100 days this next week. When you hit Psalm 10 this week, you're going to be on 100 days already, 1/10 of our way through on our 1,000-day challenge. I wonder how many of us have hit every single day for 100 days. Well, even if you haven't, it's okay. You can pick up where we are. And so we're moving into the book of Psalm. Now, the book of Psalm is interesting because it's 150 chapters. Now, we're not going to go for 150 days straight. We're going to break it up into bite-sized chunks, and so we're going to do 31 days in the month of May, and then we'll pick up the rest of Psalms at some other time. But the book of Psalms is interesting, and as we were looking at the first 31 chapters, we thought, gee, this is really like God's playlist. You know, these psalms can be put together in kind of an order. They could go into a playlist because first of all, they are songs, and then really in many ways you could curate them, and every one of them has a theme that has something to do with soothing the soul, or firing up a passion, or maybe calming an angst, or inspiring you, or assisting you through a challenge. So we're going to be launching into this whole study in Psalms. Now, John Calvin, back in the 16th century, he's a pastor, theologian, he used to call the Psalms the anatomy book of all parts of the soul. The Psalms is the anatomy book of all parts of the soul. In his 16th century sort of way of talking, this is what he said. There is not an emotion that is not here represented as in a mirror, or rather, the Holy Spirit here has drawn all the griefs, sorrows, fears, doubts, hopes, cares, perplexities, in short, all the distracting emotions with which the minds of people are prone to be agitated. I love that. We're not used to maybe that language, but he's saying, look, in the book of Psalms, you are going to find all the emotions represented there. And what we know is that while the Bible speaks to us, the book of Psalms speaks for us. It's really a book intended to be rolling off of your lips and rolling off of your soul. It's words. That's why it's so good to read and to pray and to sing the Psalms, because they really were intended to roll off your soul. Now, they can be curated into all sorts of different playlists. If you're angry, there is a playlist of Psalms for that, if you're really angry. If you are longing to worship God, there's a playlist of Psalms to worship God. If you're sad or discouraged, if you're anxious or worried, if you're maybe you're coming to a place where you just want to find new words to celebrate the grandeur and the majesty of God, there's a playlist for that. And if you're at the end of your rope and you're not sure what to do next, there is a playlist of Psalms for that. So we're going to be studying Psalm 4 today. You read it this past week on our chapter day reading plan. And it's a short psalm, only 8 verses long. But if I was to give it a title, if I was to put it in one of the playlists, you can call it whatever you want to call it. That's the beauty of playlists. You can name them whatever you want to name them. But if I was to name a playlist for this psalm, it would be this: Help, I'm in trouble again. That's what this playlist would be for. You hit the play button on this one when you're in trouble. It's help, I'm in trouble again. And what we find is that David really, as I studied this psalm, gives us 4 actions that we can do when we are in trouble. And so if you track with us, you can go on the Riverwood app and you can fill in the notes, or you can just use a pen, or you can just listen along. But here's the beginning. Action number 1, when in trouble, talk to God boldly. When in trouble, talk to God boldly. Most of us, when we get into trouble, we don't talk to God boldly. We talk with our head down, we're in shame, and we are not looking Him in the eye. But David has a different approach. Verse 1, answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayers. Now, before we look at what he's really saying and how he's saying it, let's ask this question: why is he saying it? Why is David talking about trouble and distress? Is there anything that we know about the life of David that would sort of indicate to us that here's somebody who is acquainted with trouble or distress? Well, if you know anything about the life of David, you know that the answer to that is yes. There are all sorts of seasons in his life. Let's just sort of go through them really quickly. Maybe starting when he was a shepherd boy and he had to take on lions and bears literally with his hands to protect his sheep. I mean, can you imagine the story and the angst that would come out of that experience? Or when he was put on the front lines as an untrained soldier against a literal giant. And then later on, he is brought into King Saul's courtyard as a musician, and the king at first really loves him, but then feels threatened by David. He tries to pin him to the wall with a spear, and he turns David into an outlaw, running for his life, hiding in caves with a small band of people as King Saul hunts him and tries to kill him. Does this guy know anything about what it is to have trouble or stress in his life. And then we find that King Saul dies. King David ends up conquering Jerusalem, which wasn't an Israeli city at the time, and ends up building the city of David and laying the foundations for Jerusalem's greatness. But soon after that, we find that David is standing on his balcony and he's looking down into the Kidron Valley where there are some homes just down below his balcony, and he sees a woman bathing on top of one of the roofs, and you know the story. He ends up having an affair with her. She ends up getting pregnant. He ends up having her husband killed, and then they end up losing the baby. Do you think he knows anything about distress or trouble? And then there's this whole history of horrific family dysfunction. You think your family's dysfunctional. It probably is, but probably not anything like this guy. I mean, his oldest son, Amnon, ends up raping his half-sister. And then David gets angry with him, but he doesn't really deal with it. He doesn't really punish him, maybe because of David's own infidelity in his life. He couldn't really do that. But then David's other son, the half-brother to Amnon, Absalom, who's in line for the throne, he can't take it. He is seething for 2 years because of this injustice that has happened to his sister. And what does he end up doing? He ends up having Amnon killed. And then David banishes Absalom from the kingdom. But somebody convinces David to bring Absalom back into his kingdom. But when he does, Absalom begins to undermine and turns the entire kingdom against David. And now David is once again running for his life, now from his own son, as well as all the people who have turned against him. Do you think David knows anything about stress and distress and trouble? And eventually, King David's army captain ends up killing Absalom. And for the third time in David's life, he's standing in the funeral and beside the casket of one of his children. Do you think David knows anything about distress and about problems? Later on in his life, he ignored the advice of his senior advisors, and against God's will, he took a census of the people. The result was punishment, and 70,000 people died because of a plague, because of his one wrong, stupid decision. Hundreds of thousands of people's lives were ruined because of his decision and his pride and his relying on himself. Do you think David knows anything about distress or troubles? So when David says, "Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer." This is a man, although we don't know the exact issue that was going on that caused him to write this psalm, this is somebody who's acquainted with troubles. We know what he said. We know sort of why he said it, but I'm really interested today in how he said it. You see, these words are prayed boldly. Oftentimes, there are a million forces that would love to shame you and make you hang your head and not look at God. But rather, somehow, through his distress and his problems, he prays boldly, not irreverently, not disrespectfully, not demanding or assisting or in some sort of prideful way. But there is a boldness about his prayer. Now, because these words are meant to not so much be spoken to us, but be spoken for us, I think it would be a great exercise for us in all of our worship communities to see these words on the screen and to actually let them roll off of our tongues, sort of as a test drive. Let's test drive these words that are meant to be a call for help from God in its time of trouble. So across all of our venues, we're going to read these words together out loud, starting with the word answer on 3. 1, 2, 3. Answer me when I call you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. Now, these are words that you can turn to when you are in trouble, but they weren't intended to be prayed out hesitantly. They weren't intended to be prayed out in a mousy sort of way. They were intended to say, look, I'll be honest, I'm in trouble. And you are the only one who is my righteousness. You are the only one that can actually solve this issue, but I'm looking to you. I'm looking to you, and I am asking respectfully but boldly that you would come and relieve this distress that's in my life. I know all sorts of people who are in trouble these days. I know pastors who have made some really, really stupid decisions, and they have compromised their integrity and their ministry. None of them at Riverwood that I know of, so don't worry, but they're ruining their lives. I know men and women who have compromised their marriages with misplaced affections, sending their affections out to places they should never go, or misplaced sexual passions, blowing up their marriages. And those we do have a bunch at Riverwood. And I'm not trying to pick on you, I'm just saying there are people in trouble today. I know people who spiritually, they made a vow to God and they've said, God, I love you with my whole heart and I will worship you with my hands raised. But the reality is all week long they're dancing with the world and they're cheating on God. And spiritually, they're walking around like spiritual zombies without the power of the Holy Spirit in their lives. And they're just sort of wandering aimlessly, trying to manage life on their own. And then I know so many people who are actually the victims of the fallout of disease and illness, of sin and death. And it's ruined their lives. It's just absolutely taken over their lives. It's one of those things that has caused them to walk around in such a quagmire of distress and trouble. There are a million different challenges that will come to your life that will cause you to look down and not look up to God and walk around in shame and brokenness because you're in trouble. But here we see David, and David is teaching us how to pray boldly and confidently and personally and honestly. God, I'm really in a mess here, and I need some help. You know, Pastor Tim Keller tells a story. He says that Alexander the Great apparently had a really powerful general in his ranks. And Alexander the Great went to the general and said, listen, I know that your daughter's going to be getting married. And it costs a lot of money to put a wedding on, so I just want you to know that as your commander, but also as your friend, I'm here for you. And if there's anything you need, I want to contribute towards this wedding. So come the time of the wedding, just write a note and give it to my accountant, and we'll take care of you because I'd like to give you something. So the wedding finally comes around, and this general writes a letter or a note to the accountant and sends it to them, and it was for a ludicrous amount of money. I mean, it was an insane amount of money. And so the accountant comes to Alexander the Great and says, I got this request from your buddy, the general. I'm sure now you're going to go out and have his head cut off because this is so audacious. Who does he think you are? And the accountant was really quite indignant about this request. And Alexander the Great thought for a moment. He says, I want you to pay it. And the accountant's like, what? You want to actually give this man this money? And Alexander said this, he says, give it to him. By such an outlandish request, he shows that he believes that I am both rich and generous. Alexander the Great was honored by the audacious request. I wanted to read you some words of some profound Bible teachers. And here's what they say about boldness in our prayers. Jesus talks about knocking on the door and seeking and finding. And N.T. Wright says this, Jesus is encouraging a kind of holy boldness, a sharp knocking on the door, an insistent asking, a search that refuses to give up. That's what our prayers should be like. This isn't just a routine or formal praying, going through the motions as a daily or weekly task. This is a battle going on, a fight with the powers of darkness. And those who have glimpsed the light are called to struggle in prayer. You need to be boldly going before God's throne. Mark Batterson of a church in D.C., I've had the chance of actually visiting his church. He writes a book called The Circle Maker. He says this, bold prayers honor God, and God honors bold prayers. God isn't offended by your biggest dreams and boldest prayers. He's offended by anything less. If your prayers aren't impossible to you, they are insulting to God. If your prayers aren't impossible to you, they're insulting to God. And then one of my favorites, E.M. Bounds, he wasn't even a pastor or evangelist. He was an attorney who was passionate about prayer back in the 1800s. And he wrote this, there is neither encouragement nor room in Bible religion for feeble desires, listless efforts, lazy attitudes. All must be strenuous, urgent, and ardent. I love this guy. Inflamed desires, impassioned, unwearied insistence delight heaven. God would have his children incorrigibly in earnest and persistently bold in their efforts. Heaven is too busy to listen to half-hearted prayers or to be responding to pop calls. Our whole being must be in our prayers. Heaven is too busy to listen to half-hearted prayers. On this playlist of help, I'm in trouble. When you are in trouble, David is showing us and helping us to roll a prayer off of our tongue that says, God, I will pray boldly. I will look to heaven. I will trust you, and I will ask you for help. Action number 2, when in trouble, hang on expectantly. Now, come back with me just really quickly, 3,000 years ago to when David penned this psalm. We don't know exactly what the situation was. We don't know exactly what he was using to write out this psalm, but somehow this psalm became popular. It went viral. People began using this psalm. They began using it in worship. Now, somehow that psalm from 3,000 years ago traveled down time, and the oldest copy that we have today was actually a copy from 30 A.D. It was found in the caves of Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. A shepherd boy was walking around in 1940s and threw a rock down a hole, and instead of just kind of bouncing around down there, he heard the breaking of pottery. So they climbed down and they found 50,000 pieces of scripture, and when they put them all together, they assembled into 900 scrolls, and one of them is the book of Psalms. We have ancient Hebrew from 30 AD. That's the oldest that we have. Now, if you track the Bible throughout the ages since then, for the next 2,000 years, in the 200 and 300s, it became the New Testament and Old Testament. It was curated into those different and affirmed in those different New Testament and Old Testament books. Then it was translated into Latin. Then it was translated from the Latin into English, but then King James came along in 1611. He said, no, we got to go back to the original, and we need to translate it into English from the original. And today we have 60 different versions or translations of the Bible in English, which is great. And I don't know which one you're reading as we go through chapter a day. But occasionally what I like to do is I like to look at a passage, and as much as possible, I like to go back to the original. And thankfully, with all the tools we have today, we can actually do that. We can go back to that original 30 AD ancient Hebrew text, and we can examine it. And when I did, on verse 1, I found something absolutely fascinating. You see, in verse 1, translated in a number of our Bibles, it says this: "Free me from my troubles. Give me relief from my distress. You have relieved me in my distress. When I was in trouble, you helped me." Now that's pretty reassuring, isn't it? All these words of relieving distress and helping us and so on. I thought, you know what? I wonder what the original Hebrew word for that's being translated into English. I wonder what the original Hebrew word was. And you can practice this with me because Hebrew words are just fun, right? Here it is, rachav, okay? So do that with me. It's way back here in the gut of rachav. Okay, let's try it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Rachav. Okay, one more. Rachav. Okay, now wipe the spit off of the chair in front of you or the person's hair in front of you, okay? Because something probably came out when you said that, right? Rachav. So I thought, what is rachav? Is it really help me and relieve me of my distress? I went to other passages and I found in Deuteronomy 12:20, when the Lord your God has rachav, or enlarged your territory. Interesting. 2 Samuel 22, verse 36, "You, Rachav, enlarge my path under me." And I found out that Rachav, the literal translation of it, really isn't relieve me or help me or took away my problems. It's to grow bigger. Rachav is to grow bigger or to enlarge or to increase. In fact, a better translation in English would be this: "In pressure, thou hast enlarged me." Whenever I was in distress, you enlarged me. In other words, when you're in the middle of a trouble, not only does God relieve it and help you, but instead of just doing that, He also enlarges you. In fact, He takes that outside pressure. You could say this: pressure from the outside makes us bigger on the inside. He takes that pressure from the outside and He actually increases your capacity and makes you bigger on the inside. You know, too often I feel like when I'm in a trouble situation, it feels like chunks of me are being chipped away. It feels like I'm being hammered on and big chunks of me. It feels like I'm just being beat up. We often feel like 1 minute life is good and we're happy and things are going really well. And then it feels like when a trouble comes, either that trouble or maybe God Himself, it feels like God's just beating on us. And we're sitting there feeling like, oh, chunks of me are flying all over the place. I am being depleted. And when I experience a personal problem, I often feel like the circumstances or sometimes God himself is trying to wear me down and deplete me. And I feel these sharp blows, and it feels like it's relentless, like one blow after another after another. And in this moment, I'm so not in control. Because if I was, I would yell, stop, just stop it already. I don't like this, I hate it. And as I look around my life, all I see is shards and pieces of what I used to be, what could have been, and they're laying all around me. Oh, and then it starts to attack my mind, right? Then you start to feel like it's attacking your head, and you're getting these whacks upside the head, and they come as punishing thoughts of, I can't take this anymore. If this problem, if God keeps depleting me like this, there will be nothing left of me by the end of it. I'm getting smaller and smaller. I'm getting less and less with every pound of the hammer. I just wish that it would stop. But it's only the beginning, because then it begins to get more personal. Now it's not great big whacks that are taking chunks of you, but it's like this little insistent chiseling away at the foundation of who you are. And I want to escape. And I want the beating and the chipping to go away. And I want to scream, go pick on somebody else. I was perfectly happy before you, God, came along and gave me this problem. Why are you so cruel? I never will be the same because of this, even as this problem and the trouble, and maybe God continues or begins to chip away at my heart. And then finally, one day I realize that the pounding and the relentless hammering has stopped. And I feel an arm on my shoulder. Hold it a second. I have a shoulder? I thought I was just a big blob of a rock. Where did that come from? And that's when I begin to realize that as the artist is resting on me, I realize that the beating of that hammer and the chisel's surgery upon my life wasn't meant to destroy me. It wasn't meant to deplete me. It was meant to take away what was not necessary in order to create a masterpiece. When a problem comes into your life, it's not intended to destroy you. It's not intended to deplete you. But rather, the master artist looks at you, and he doesn't look at you like this big blob of rock with no potential or no purpose and nothing special. Rather, he looks at you and he says, I see a masterpiece inside of there, but I'm going to have to chip away what is not necessary. The problems are necessary in our life to chip away what is not necessary in our character. And David seems to realize this, and he says, God, when I come to this problem, you rachav me. You cause the pressure from the outside to actually make me bigger on the inside. Action number 3, when in trouble, remind yourself of what is true. Verse 3, know that the Lord has set apart his faithful servant for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. David is reminding himself in this moment of what is true. You know, when the troubles come, we often don't look to God with boldness. We rather hang our head in shame. When the troubles come, we forget that this chipping away is actually intended to make us larger and bigger on the inside and to increase our character. And when the troubles come, we need to remind ourselves of truth. So what I would love to do this morning is I'd like to read for you my playlist. You see, I know a few troubles, I know a few stresses, I know a few distresses that come to my life. And I have a playlist. It's not a song playlist, it's a scriptural playlist. And what I'd love to do is simply let the scriptures speak for themselves, and what they're going to do is they're going to remind us of truth. And if you happen to be in a situation where you're in trouble, or you're in distress, or you're feeling the pressure from the outside, maybe you want to borrow my playlist. Proverbs 3. Trust in the Lord completely, and do not rely on your own opinions. With all your heart, rely on him to guide you, and he will lead you in every decision you make. Become intimate with him in whatever you do, and he will lead you wherever you go. The truth here is that my own heart and mind, it fools me. I'm very prone to getting fooled by my own heart, so I need to trust in somebody else, and I lean into God, and I ask Him to guide me and direct me. Joshua 1:9, love this one. I've commanded you to be strong and courageous. That one always gets me, because I would say, well, hold on, I'm fearful and full of anxiety right now, and you're commanding me to be strong and courageous? That must mean that strength and courage is available to me and maybe even inside of me. I command you to be strong and courageous. Don't ever be afraid or discouraged. I am the Lord your God, and I will be there to help you wherever you go. The truth I remind myself with that verse is that God is with me every step of the way. 1 Peter 5, pour out your worries and stress upon Him. Another version says, cast your cares upon Him. Actually take them and throw them onto Him and leave them there, for He always cares for you. The truth there reminds me that my problems and cares matter to God. And He's offered that I don't need to carry them, that He is willing to carry them. Romans 8:35, nothing in this universe has the power to diminish God's love towards us. Troubles, pressures, and problems are unable to come between us and heaven's love. Doesn't that just do something for your soul when you access that truth? The truth that God is not intimidated by our problems. Psalm 40, admittedly, is a little bit longer that we're going to read, but the reason is because this one was actually etched and burnt upon my soul when I was a young adult. So I look at it and say, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It takes me back, 35 years to a moment where God met me in the midst of a trouble and listened to these powerful words. I waited and waited and waited some more patiently, knowing God would come through for me. Then at last, He bent down and listened to my cry. He stooped down to lift me out of danger from the desolate pit I was in, out of the muddy mess I had fallen into. Now He's lifted me up into a firm, secure place and steadied me while I walk along His ascending path. A new song for a new day rises up in me every time I think about how He breaks through for me. Ecstatic praise pours out of my mouth until everyone hears how God has set me free. Many will see His miracles in my life, and they'll stand in awe of God and fall in love with Him. That truth is that whatever quicksand I find myself in, God has promised to lift me out, put my feet on a rock, and change my tune. He's going to change my tune. And then we could not do a playlist about problems without James chapter 1. My fellow believers, when it seems as though you are facing nothing but difficulties, see it as an invaluable opportunity to experience the greatest joy that you can. For you know that when your faith is tested, it stirs up power within you to endure all things. And then as your endurance grows even stronger, it will release perfection into every part of your being until there is nothing missing and nothing lacking. The truth here is that troubles are the gateway to increase in strength. That's my playlist. And I don't know if you want to borrow it or not, but when I remind myself of what is truth, suddenly my troubles and my problems, they take on a different texture. They look different. They feel different. They sound different. And they're not as scary. Now, David has one more action for us, and this one might surprise you. It's this. It's when you are in trouble. Sleep well, resting in God. Sleep well, resting in God. David started his little psalm in verse 1, waking up in the morning panicking. Oh, God, you got to help me. You're my righteousness. You're the only one that can save me. You're the only one that can do this. I'm leaning into you. I'm looking to you. I'm boldly asking that you would relieve my distress, that you would enlarge me even as I experience pressures from the outside. He started in a panic in verse 1. But now, 8 verses later, his circumstances have not changed, but David has changed. And his prayer has changed, and his heart has changed. In fact, we read this in verse 8. It says this, In peace, I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. In peace, I'm going to lie down and sleep. For you cause me to dwell in safety. David says, I'm preparing for a good night's sleep. My circumstances haven't changed. My problems are still here. I'm still feeling distressed. But you know what? I'm going to sleep really well tonight. And it's not because he found some new pill. It's not because he's into some new form of yoga and mindfulness. It's not his melatonin that he somehow discovered or his aromatherapy that he's got misting in his cave or wherever he is. Rather, it's because he knows that he is sitting in the hand of God, and God is going to be his safety. God is going to surround him and be his safety so he can rest. You know, World War II was brutal on London. There were 56 nights straight of bombing blitzes on England. And in London, 40,000 civilians were killed during these bombing blitzes. It was a horrific time. I don't think any of us can even really imagine what that was like. But there was one woman who every night she would sleep peacefully. And this sort of got around. And so after the war, the bombing blitzes stopped, she was interviewed. And they asked her, what's the secret to your calmness, that in the midst of all this terror and all this stuff that's going on in your life, that you were able to sleep so well? And with a quaint British stiff upper lip, she said this, well, every night I say my prayers. And then I remember that God is always watching, so I go peacefully to sleep. And then, just sort of as an afterthought, she says, after all, there's no need for both of us to stay awake. I love that. God never sleeps or slumbers. There's no need for both of us to stay awake. You know, the psalmist in another playlist called the Pilgrim's Journey playlist in Psalm 121, the pilgrims would come from all over the Middle East, and they would come to Jerusalem to worship God. And as they got near, it was a very dangerous and tiresome journey, but as they got near, they saw the mountains from where their help came from. And so they had a song or a psalm in that playlist called the Journey playlist. And as they got close to the mountains and as they were very tired, at night they would start a fire and then they would sing or they would recite the psalm as they went to sleep. And part of it says this, He won't let you stumble, your guardian guard won't fall asleep. Not on your life. Israel's guardian will never doze or sleep. And I almost imagine maybe in ancient Hebrew, somebody muttering under their breath, well, might as well go to sleep. There's no sense both of us being awake. God wants to give you that peace in your life. So what we've done and what we're going to do for all 4 weeks of this series is we've actually gone on Apple Music and Spotify and we've created a playlist for today's message. And it's called Help, I'm in Trouble Again. It's the Help, I'm in Trouble Again playlist with contemporary worship songs. If you are in trouble, if you are feeling stress and pressure from the outside, I want to encourage you, go to Apple or Spotify, find this playlist, go to our website, it's on there as well, and download this playlist and just listen to these truths and these songs and allow them to do a work in your heart. In fact, at all of our worship communities right now, we're going to respond to God and we're going to sing one of the songs that's on that playlist. So I'm going to hand you off to the various worship sites. God bless you. Thanks for joining us. Read your Psalms this next week. We'll be back together next weekend. Have a great week.